speakers tonight. Can you hear me in back?
Not really.
Yes?
No.
So, I'll try to speak up a little bit better. Okay. So, I'll try to. There you go. All right, now you know that I don't do this very often. So before I introduce our speakers tonight, I would like to go through a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, water, coffee, and some snacks are here. Please help yourselves. Then the meeting will be broadcasted via Zoom and recorded. So hopefully we'll be able to share the recording of the meeting after. Okay. And hopefully we don't have technical difficulty this time as we had last time, unfortunately. So if you are on Zoom and you have questions, please type them in the chat and we'll do our best to address them. Also, please make sure that you register at the entrance if you haven't already. That's just our way to get your email information so that we can send you information for additional events, follow up, like the registration of this meeting and everything else that comes in important meetings to attend, etc. So please don't forget to do that. And also, please don't forget to pick up, there's a lot of information there that a lot of people wrote about school consolidation, about MBTA. So please take a look at that, bring it home with you, share it with the people that you are interested. All right, without further ado, I just want to introduce our first speaker, John Kolackovsky. Hey, John. Yes.
As you said, I'm John Kolackovsky.
No.
You gotta speak right into it.
You
You gotta speak right into it. Direct, say
It's on. Yeah. Keep it there.
Story, or is that my name?
Hello.
it's too low.
Too low.
Too low. Maybe I should use that other. Because I couldn't do
Yeah, right. You just gotta speak right directly into it, you
Hold
know?
it to your lips.
Yeah.
There you go.
All these-
Anyway, my name is John Kolackovsky. I'm a resident of Rockport and a chemical engineer by trade. First of all, I want to thank all the residents of Hamilton for welcoming us again. Yes, and is there anybody from Wenham here as well? There are quite a few people from Wenham, it's good to see. Yes.
And don't move it. Keep it there. We're gonna take it.
All right, okay, I tried to do better. Any other towns here? Any other people from other towns other than Hamilton? and Wenham?
Gloucester.
Oh, good old Gloucester, okay. Okay, very good.
Keep slower. Yeah.
We have given this version of the MBTA multifamily zoning presentation to 11 towns and cities, including Hamilton. 2 more will be done in the fall, and we are currently reviewing 1 more recent request. I guess we're gonna look at Attorney Walsh's town, see if they qualify for a presentation. But anyway, why do we do these presentations? Since we all work for a living, this is part-time for us. We're not getting paid, we're not looking for donations, we just think it's the right thing to do. We're also aware that some people in our towns are being paid to be advocates for the MBTA mandate. There's a lot of money promoting the mandate. If you really look into matters, there's a lot of donors' money in back of this, and that's essentially what we're up against. More and more towns is just saying no to the state mandate. Milton started it, but at least 8 towns are pushing back. I believe there's a lot more than that. I just can't keep up with all the towns pushing back and voting it down or postponing the vote. We filed a lawsuit in Rockport back in 2022. That gentleman over there, Z, was part of it with me and a few other people from Rockport.
Yeah.
And we just recently were in court on the 28th this week. The state told the court why they shouldn't recognize the lawsuit. And I guess Mike did a great job persuading them to look at the lawsuit. And the judge, by the name, what's her name now? Oh, yeah. The Honorable Judge Christine Buxton is gonna review it and get back to us about the case. If need be, we may repeal it if we're successful. Wonderful, but anyway, we will know, but we don't have a timetable when she will get back to us. That's up to the courts. We have also filed a class action lawsuit reinforcing the Rockport lawsuit with a class grouping of 8 individual citizen groups from actually 18 towns, okay? 12 towns are included in the actual suit, and 6 more have provided the paperwork and will be added to the class action suit. Although we are not openly soliciting more town groups to join, some more may still be planning to join. We'll have to see about that, but I know some towns have expressed interest, some additional towns. We also recently filed a federal suit as well, using slightly different arguments. And that has been filed. We don't have a date on that as well, but that's in the system. So the subject of the meeting is the mandate or the 3A. It really can be simplified. What is this? Anybody involved in the town that is familiar with the 3A? I assume most of you people know something about it, right? But really, it's the state's asking us to give up our rights, our zoning rights to states bureaucrats. That's what it really boils down to. If you take away everything, or would it be lost rights can ultimately and arbitrarily change without our permission after that takes place, if you do that. And in return, our towns maintain their current existing opportunity to apply for 4 grant groups that up to now, in most cases, amounted to very little. Very little. It's almost dropping the bucket compared to your normal town budget. Okay. And mind you, this money is your money. It's not the state's money to begin with. In Rockport, we became aware that some of our town officials and planning board members were simply doing what the state wanted done while ignoring what the people were concerned about. People were concerned about the ramifications, what it's going to do to the town. I assume in Hamilton and Wenham, you have the same concerns, what's going to happen to your town if this goes through. And I'm sure it will change significantly. With the increase in population, it's going to change a lot of things that you take for granted now, and perhaps why you moved into this happens. I cannot speak for Hamilton, but I found this to be the case in many towns, that a lot of the town government was sort of going along with what the state wanted. There were exceptions in many towns, but usually it was a minority in the political group that was in charge of the town themselves. I'm not sure what that is the case in Hamilton, but I'm just bringing this up. In general, I believe some of the town officials and planning board members could have done a better job in providing us with that needed information. For instance, how many of you are aware of home rule statutes? Who's aware of that? So there's a few of you aware of it, and some was here for last meeting, and you might be aware of it. But by right, I believe your town officials should have made you aware of it, because it's a protective law rather for your town, giving you rights, and Mike will be going through that. Attorney Walsh will be going through that a little bit more. As you know, that if a town refuses to accept the mandate, the state has threatened to deny them access to certain grants. But did your town actually tell you what they received under these grants for the last 5 years or 10 years? I think Hamilton did some research, and I think it was pretty small. I don't know about Wenham. I suspect it's pretty small too.
28,000.
For how many?
Hamilton.
For 1 year or
What?
1 year? And that was it?
That's what we're risking.
Yeah,
It's either 28 or 38, but it's
pretty small.
it's under 50,000.
Yeah.
We would lose if we applied.
That's even smaller than some of the other.
It's such a negligible amount.
Yes, it is. And you're giving up a lot. You're giving up your control.
60 years here where we're really stressed for all this.
I could imagine. I could imagine. And I really think the town officials should have been telling you this. How did you find this out? If you-
I attend meetings in Walsh.
So you found it out on your own or?
Yes, on my own. It wasn't announced.
Yeah, so I think I think town officials could have done a better job in letting people know exactly what's at risk. What are these grants, how big they are, what do they mean, are they really important to your town or not? But it turns out that really didn't seem to be the case. And, how many of you believes most of the towns have already agreed to this mandate? A lot of people feel that way.
I feel like it's a done deal.
Well, a lot of people are doing the paperwork. There's required paperwork throughout the process. And the paperwork really doesn't mean you are accepting the mandate. It just means you're following the necessary paperwork. The vote in your town, cities, which your town would have a vote, will be dictating whether you accept it or not the paperwork that's submitted. Okay, cities are a little different. There's a different grouping that will vote for it, okay? But the bottom line is that until you vote for it, you're not accepting it or denying it, so you have options, and it's not a done deal. I guess the best way to put it is, other towns have put up resistance, and we get into that a little later, but anyway. Did your town actually look into the legalities of the mandate? I bet you most towns haven't. I know my town didn't really, but that's a big question that people are not being told about whether they did, and if they did, what was the results? Did they look into that in Wenham or Hamilton? Does anyone know?
Yes,
Did they?
yes.
And what they concluded?
Well, we've gotten conflicting guidance, and one of them was that it's questionable because
Maybe it'd be better than I do this microphone.
it's questionable because the Department of Executive Housing and Executive Affordable, the Executive Office of Housing issued guidelines, not regulations.
Right.
So that's the crux of the question is, can you enforce this based on guidelines as opposed as to regulations where you've had public hearings and adopted those in a public process?
Anyone else doing the investigation on that?
Yeah,
Maybe that works.
hello? Hello, testing,
Fight up against it, fight up against it.
testing, okay, there you go. All right, so, my wife and I have been to almost every board. There's information that's dropped. Not all the boards even know what the left and the right are doing. We went to the select board. I'm gonna put this on public record for the second time. Do not believe the Massachusetts school building authority percentages or numbers, because when it says 50%, they only cover certain things. I did an analysis, it averages out to 25%. They did a survey today on some of the things and it was misleading, but the point on the boards is when we got to the planning board, I got up and asked them, because I found on the state site, 4.3A, that Hamilton had filed an action plan. A week before, I was at the select board meeting, and they totally said that no action from that board has happened for 3A. So when I went to the planning board, I asked them, school committee doesn't know this, select board doesn't know this, the other planning board, who checked this box? Who filled this out? And even people on that board didn't know it. And then one person raised their hand and said, oh, I did.
Did anyone get anything where they found out anything, what happened, situation right now? Sorry about that. Does anybody else have anything about the Hamilton situation right now?
Yeah, we have an action plan.
Let me ask you something. Has the town even crudely calculated the increases in expenses that would be the result of the mandate? For instance, has the school did any calculations how an increase of student population will affect the cost?
No.
So the rumors I was hearing was that it would be an average of $2,000 per household for the entire project, which would include the rebuild of Cutler School to include 700 and some students. And, you know, I live on Asbury.
Could everybody hear her?
No.
Lucia. You're doing fine.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not big with public
Don't
speaking,
worry
but
about it.
we live on Asbury Street, Diego Boats, and my husband's family came here in 1950 and built the business. And we've heard that the average will be $2,000 per household just for the rebuild of Cutler. And that's on top of what they voted in for that turf field and all that other $10 million stuff on top of that. So we're all going to get a big increase on our tax bills in the next couple of years, no matter what we do. I'm sorry, it's just, I was born and raised here, and they do what they're gonna do. Like, it's just, so.
It's not necessarily in their hands to do what they want to do truthfully.
I would love to believe that.
When you're talking about just the structure
So, for-
expenses,
right,
you're not even talking about
No.
the added teachers that may be required.
added fire department, added police,
Exactly.
added traffic lights, added roadways.
And how is your water supply here? Is it well?
No, we have public sewer.
No, no, how do you get water?
Well,
Well, right?
Well, water.
So you don't even know your water table effects, which should be studied.
Right, we have a piece of water we have now.
What's that?
Yeah, we can.
Rockport has the same situation. Why don't you try to speak over there, please?
Boy, right into it. Start getting.
Turned 66 yesterday. So I just wanted to comment on your comment. When the town says it's gonna cost the average taxpayer, is the average taxpayer, it's gonna be all tax.
No, but the average.
Yeah.
Yeah, $2,000. What they would do on the Cutler School, they would actually bond that. So in other words, they wouldn't take the tax money from the actual tax year to do a capital job like that.
Right.
They would sell municipal bonds, Massachusetts municipal bonds, tax-free bonds. So the point is, they would pay for that over 20 to 30 years. So it wouldn't be anywhere close on the annual basis to $2,000 for the average taxpayer. Does that make sense to everybody? It's like buying a mortgage. You're gonna take a mortgage out into the future. You can pay small amounts over time at a relatively low interest rate.
But 6 months ago, we got a $1,000 per quarter increase because of an assessment that we had no idea about. And that doesn't even,
Well,
like that.
just
No, I'm just saying, our taxes, we pay more than 20 grand just to exist in this town. And we pay for the good services, the good schools, the good things that we have. We pay a premium for that. And if you're gonna charge us another 5 grand, and then you're still. All that away, you're gonna knock down, do all these things. Why would I stay in town that I was born and raised here, and I love this small town existence. If you're gonna blow the
Downtown up, and we're gonna have it in our council thinking we're gonna.
Sorry.
at any
Just having
rate,
break on evenings.
we live here, or have lived here forever. We like the small town existence. If the town is gonna blow up and you're gonna take all that away, you can't expect us to be able to afford to stay here. And the people that have tried to stay here are being forced out I know a lot of people that are selling their homes right now. I know so many people that are selling their homes right now. They don't want to sell their homes. They want to stay here, but they can't afford it. And that's not fair.
We're with me. I 100% agree with you. I think everyone in this room, they didn't be here.
The taxes are going to go up. In the next 5 years, we're going to see a huge increase.
I was talking about the school itself. For house, so they, for example, if
If it's 100, even if it's 100 million instead of 200 million, taxes are still going to increase.
I'm seeing what happened. You're thinking that I'm opposing what you said. I'm not.
That's not what I'm thinking. I'm just thinking that you're not understanding the depth of this.
I agree with you, taxes. And I don't have any business with all. That doesn't get paid for class. So I fully understand what you're talking about. I think everyone in this, I mean, this is a real easy call for everyone here. But the deal is we need to be able to get enough people to go to town meeting to vote no on 3A. Because yeah, that's what you should take away tonight. We need to get everybody you know. I don't know, I think everyone here probably understands and realizes that town meeting is very, very powerful. It appropriates all the funds and approves everything. The selectmen can do nothing without town meeting. They can't spend a penny. That's where all the money comes from. It equals, town meeting equals the legislature or Congress at the federal level. And town meeting, we should go to it. Really, it's the most powerful part. But what we should come away with tonight is everyone needs to get their friends, their neighbors, the people they would insure, the people they do whatever they do, all your activities, get people to go to the town meeting and vote no on 3A. Is that good?
Like, it's just not gonna.
How you know all this?
Before I moved here, I lived in Weston and I was on the finance committee there for 9 years. I moved to Wenham when I married my lovely wife. And she goes up. And so I was on the FinCom at kind of Wenham for 3 years. So I understand that how everything is financed. When it comes to the schools, not the school property, which is different, that's a capital expense. But when it comes to students, that's our biggest part of the budget. Roughly in all the town across the state. 70% of the budget, you probably all know, is schools. And the per pupil cost is really, really high. And if we add as many units as I ever do, actually add the number of children going to these schools, whatever the formula is between the two towns, it's going to be a significant increase in your taxes. Significant. Never mind the fact that I know this, one of the things I say to my wife, if they build that huge building down where currently the school is, the sun's not going to shine on Pat Park again. It's going to be in shadow based on what I've heard about these buildings. You got to know, you got to get everybody involved. It's that simple. You have the power to do it. They think they do, they don't. You do. The town meeting has all the power.
Right, there you go.
Okay, let's, only quick questions. Yeah.
Yes, for those that just spoke, I just had a question, because when we did the town meeting for the middle school going to the high school, that was voted down by the people in town.
Right.
And then they just brought it to a vote again a week later, and it was voted down. And they brought it again about a week later, and it was voted down. And then they brought it on like Thursday when.
Hold on 1 second. Is that even legal?
For regular bylaws and for spending, maybe, but for zoning, if you vote it down, it can't come back for 2 years without the express permission of the planning board.
Okay, but on the school thing, they just kept bringing it back until the fourth time they They got it midday, and people were working, and they got the vote. So let's meet them for their-
Are you talking about the town meeting?
Yeah.
I can answer that.
So what's gonna stop them is us, we the people,
Yeah.
not allowing them to keep pushing the boundaries because we've allowed them for years.
Right.
Things that happen in these schools, in elementary schools that are disgusting.
Yeah.
We let it happen. We back down. If we continue to back down, we'll lose everything.
Are you right? How about Hague?
So tolerance is one thing,
Okay,
but there's a line of intolerance,
Right.
and we have the power.
very good.
You might-
Wait a minute. Hey, get it out of here.
We want to hear everything I am.
Yeah, please do.
I just wanted to address quickly the town meeting. So town meeting dates are typically firm dates. Everyone in the town is used to it. So the state hates when towns put things that are unpopular or significant in what they call special town meetings. Special town meetings are really only supposed to be called if there's like a snow emergency, we're out of money for plowing, you have a special town meeting because they can only, ones who can appropriate, they appropriate the money for plowing. That's what it's supposed to be. But towns do try to have things like this come up. Usually on the 4th of July week is where they always do it at the same time. When no one's around, and but the state would stop them if they tried to do it.
We planned a meeting.
Can I just offer a clarification here? I think this is great, democracy in action. But there's some presumptions about what is going to happen that are based on presumptions, not facts.
What's your name?
So my name is Rick Mitchell. I live at 36 Rock Maple Ave, and I served on the planning board for 22 years. I'm chair of the Hamilton Development Corporation that developed Willow Flats, which is 18 units of market rate housing. And 9 of those are affordable units. So that was the first major rental development in this town in over 30 years. So it's great that we're talking about 3A, but the town has not, and I'm talking about the town leaders, the planning board and the select board has not made a decision to endorse or push 3A to town meeting this fall. The presumption is that there needs to be a lot of intensive discussion about 3A and its potential impacts, if there are any. We are waiting for the Supreme Court to hear Milton's case on 3A to determine whether in fact it is enforceable or it's going to get remanded back to the Executive Office of Housing and Affordable Communities. So it's great that we're being informed, but there's a lot going on here that is important for everybody to make an informed decision, and no is fine because that's the will of the people. But we're going to make a no decision. Let's make an informed no decision based on the
That's
facts.
what we're here. Let's let them talk.
So one thing I want to clarify is, people are tying Winthrop to the 3A and, saying there's going to be over 225 units or more built there. Well, there are a number of limiting factors. First of all, we don't have public sewer. We have height building limits. We have setback limits. Second, if and when the Winthrop school site is vacated, and that's not a given, there's no, and you have the power to determine this. The town has to decide what it wants to do with it. So it could say, well, we'd like to develop some of it, but it could be 5 acres. It could be 4 acres. They could turn part of it into a park. You guys get to decide. So before we all get into this fear mongering about the world is going to turn upside down and take over the town, there's a lot of information and things that you guys actually control to make it work. That's my.
Great.
We're going to go ahead.
All right, so I just wanted to step in as a moderator and just
Yes.
say, let's please let them speak, the speaker talk, because we're gonna be here only until 9 and everybody has to go. So let's just try to listen to them. They have a lot to tell us, and let's continue talking and have an interactive discussion, but please go ahead.
All right, the bottom line is the town has an obligation to let you know what they think, the costs they expect to incur, the laws that are being affected by their actions. And if they haven't, perhaps they could do a little better job in doing that. You may want to know that in the town of Wenham, town officials instructed various town departments to provide these numbers. And as a result, the residents really have a good idea of what costs are up there on the mandate and what costs will be realized from the mandate. Now, this is the only town that we ran across where truthfully, the town officials exercise their duties fully. I'm not saying Hamilton that fell down, I'm just saying, I'm mentioning that this town really did a good job on knowing the facts. Another town, Winthrop, the officials and very interested citizens also did some good research on the MBTA mandate, and as a result, the residents are more knowledgeable about the issues than those in most other towns. It's unfortunate that when these zones are given up, whether people like to admit it or not, when these zones are given up to the state, they lose control. The towns lose control of these zones. If you talk to anybody from Salem, you'll know that's the truth. They gave it up and they keep trying to stay abreast of what is required, and that keeps changing. I would expect town government to provide the residents with the information so they can make the right decisions that's best for their town. If they don't, you have the right to get these questions answered, and you should command them, I personally think. Okay, is there any, I hate to bring this up, I believe it's any question at this time, but no, I'm not bringing that up. Before I turn this presentation over to Attorney Viens, do I pronounce that right? Then, okay. I just want to mention a few things that I'd like you to keep in mind. Do you really have a housing shortage, or is there really just a shortage of affordable housing in your town? Okay, the state has claimed that the mandate was voted for by a large majority of state representatives. That is a fact, but the majority vote was for a very large spending bill, which they're very good at doing that, and probably not the mandate. The actual mandate was only 3 small paragraphs buried in the massive bill. However, it was given, and then since that time, the bureaucrats have built up 40 pages of guidelines to go by, and that's what you're struggling with right now or hearing about. Because of the MA, Massachusetts high taxes, shrinking manufacturing, intrusive government regulations, anti-small business policies, I believe motivated taxpaying citizens are starting to move out of Massachusetts, just like in California. And if this is correct, or even partially correct, why are there 220,000 units required or looking for to be developed in the state in the immediate future and even more down the road? The state claims to have a deficit of only $1 billion. I believe the state will eventually admit that an even greater deficit is there. You really think they will have any money for future grants, even though, I mean, you really want the $28,000 that you guys got already to be duplicated, I guess. If you approve this mandate and is later ruled illegal, your town may be stuck with complying with it anyway. If you approve this mandate, there will be a greater emphasis on relying more on the MBTA. And anybody who ever travels the MBTA knows you can't really rely on them very much. And unless you're going to Boston and you're coming back at an early time, it's useless.
Can I just make one quick question? You just said that there's only that people leaving in droves, and yet there's only 1,000 spots needed. Is that right?
No, I didn't say that.
What did
I said that most, a lot of the reasons people are leaving Massachusetts is because of high taxes, the opportunities and things on that line. I conjecture that, okay? And I think it's starting to look like California, where a lot of people left California. And I think the same thing's happening, will be happening in Massachusetts as well. So I'm saying, I'm asking the question, why do we need 220,000 units right now? What are these units for?
And why did the governor come out a few months ago and ask if anyone has room in their house, please take in some migrants?
Got it?
And like the whole top floor of Encore is being used by the state. And most of the hotels anywhere near 128 are being used by the state, so there must be a need to put people.
That's true. But it depends on, whether,
You put them in a rich town, they're gonna get paid for it.
you'll be paying for it to get your taxes as well. So it's a no-win situation. So I think a lot of people are going to make that choice and possibly move these things pass. Anyway. I thank you for listening, and I think we had a lot of good questions and a lot of contribution already from people of Hamilton. I appreciate that because it shows that people are paying attention to what's going on, and you have to pay attention to what's going on. I don't think, well, I'm from the school that you gotta watch what government does.
Yes, and yeah.
You can't trust them completely. There are good people in government and there's bad people in government. And unfortunately, you have to keep your eyes open. So that's what I'm gonna say. And I'd like to turn this meeting over now to Attorney Viens.
Yes.
Say it again. Yes. All right, yes, okay. All right. Thank you. And she's been very active in her town. She knows her town very well. And she'll let you know that.
Thank you so much. John's the best. He's really the best. I'm so happy to be here in Hamilton again today. I told both of these two that I wouldn't travel any more than 25 minutes from my home for these anymore. Because I do have 2 kids and they do have homework and bedtime and all that stuff, but I'm invested in you all. I came here before,
Thank you.
I see really good people here. I see a really lovely town that's worth my time. And that's why I'm here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really important. I'll start by saying, zoning is inherently local for a reason. You know your town best. I'm willing to bet Maura Healy has never been to this town. But you know what your kids require. You know what you can afford. You know what fits in with the rest of the place, right? And that is why there's very good reasons for this. It's not just because, our rights, this and that. It's because it makes sense. You have the ability to go to your planning board meetings and voice your say. And I'm so glad to hear that there are planning board meeting members here in the audience today, because they know and they've experienced your input and your voice, and they've incorporated that input into what happens next. That's your right. And unfortunately, that's what 3A actually takes away. It's right to think that we're in the same situation we were like in 1776 with like the Stamp Act. It's just an insane time. So I'm going to talk about the fact that this whole idea of zoning for density is that's what 3A does, and I'll explain how that is. I'll talk about how these multifamily units that 3A promotes is not what you are used to here in Hamilton or in Wenham, not our traditional New England multifamily units. And then I'll talk about the cost of compliance, what you would be giving up. It is 4 grants in the original law. I think it sounds like there's $28,000 from last year that we may have gotten here from these 4 grants. And yeah, it's significantly less than what Hamilton or Wenham will be paying for after complying with 3A. One more quick point.
just to hit a couple of these really great comments that were mentioned here today. This idea of a low interest loan, I've heard this too. This is okay, spreading out this wild astronomical cost over a number of years doesn't really justify this situation, and this idea that we would give up our right to participate in local government is also really unfortunate. We have a really small town center in Winthrop, and last year I had a charrette. I don't know if any of you know what a charrette is. It's like a brainstorming session, a community brainstorming session in our library about what we want to see for our fire station. We're going to do the same thing with our town center. And that's something you can do today. You can go to your planning board meeting and you can say, we want to see this type of business, and we want to experience this type of, you know, have an ice cream shop or have some concerts here in our local town center. And that's something that you get to do today. But unfortunately, if you were to put, for example, in my town, it's been circulated, this idea of putting a 3A district in our town center, that would diminish those ideas that we want to have represented in our town center going forward. All right. Hamilton 3A quota. So Hamilton is considered a commuter rail district or commuter rail category. That means that Hamilton has to zone for 731 additional units with a minimum land area of 49 acres. That's a lot. That's tremendous. Hamilton, actually, if you go to the next slide. Actually, go ahead. Sorry. So Hamilton has actually had a population that really hasn't budged for about 14 years. Just FYI. I think it's been like about 200 person difference in about 14 years, right? So if you were forced to zone for another 731 units for families with children, which means probably like 4 or 5 times 731, that means approximately like 3,000 to 4,000 people. That includes obviously children, because the idea is that these new units are meant for families with children, which of course means probably a new school. It sounds like same situation in Winthrop where I live.
And Hamilton and Wenham are regional, so when you include the housing that's going into Wenham, that will also include families with children. And those children will also be coming into the one school they propose for Cutler. You know, you're looking at 700-800 kids on one campus. It's a lot of
tremendous.
It's a lot of little.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to hear that people are reaching out and trying to figure out what we've gained from the 4 grants in the last however many years. I'm doing the same thing. I just submitted a Freedom of Information Act request, and that's due on June 4th. Before we go to the next slide, just quickly, who's exempt? Obviously, Boston, the entire western half of the state, and several other little towns here and there, the Cape. Who lives in Boston? Andrea Campbell lives in Boston. She lives in Mattapan. She is across the way from Milton. They share a historic trolley together, which I feel is probably relatively awkward if they're on the same trolley together. I doubt that's the case. My senator, Lydia Gresham Edwards, she actually lives in East Boston. My town, Winthrop, is actually tied to this law with through the Orient Heights MBTA station, which is in East Boston, believe it or not. It's very sporadic here and there, and as a result, it's unfair, right? We're cherry-picked towns where the 177, the lucky 177. Next slide, please. So to just really hammer in the point that this law punishes the densest towns, you can, and not trying to pick on West Newbury whatsoever, but West Newbury is about the same size as Hamilton. It's 14.7 square miles. It has approximately the same number of people. Sorry. So you have, West Newbury has less people than Hamilton, has more acreage than Hamilton, and has two zones for only 87 additional units to your 700 and some units. They actually are closer in population to Wenham. Wenham has about the same population, is half the size of West Newbury, but has to zone for 4 times the number of units that West Newbury does. That's because West Newbury is considered an adjacent small town, which means they only have to zone for 5% of their existing housing, thank you, Michael, of their existing housing stock with no minimum acreage requirements. So basically the idea is, what happened here is that because this law was thrown together last minute, I don't think they went through all the scenarios that this could result in. And what ended up happening is that if you're thinking about this logically, what 3A results in is, hey, Hamilton, hey, Wenham, because you have so many people living in such a small space, you must be able to take on more of this quota or more people than the average small town, and under 3A, a small town means less people. It doesn't mean less space.
Right.
So they have lots more space, lots less people, so more area to build in. But under 3A, you're considered a small town, so you have to put in less units or zone for less units. It actually ties into whether you qualify for grants to grow your town. It makes no sense. It was obviously thrown together last minute. It's not fair. But here we have this hodgepodge result that is very it's unfair. It's another vulnerability of this law.
What can you do though? Like,
what
can you do?
Sue. Sadly, we are protecting ourselves from our own government at this point. It's just a very unfortunate situation, but
That's
here we
what I
are.
want.
Unfortunately, yeah. And vote, obviously.
Just to be clear, the 3A housing, it is gonna be subsidized housing, correct?
No.
People rental.
I'll get to that. Good, very good question. I'm glad you raised that. Let's move on to the next slide. Rapid density. And we'll get to your question in a second. Rapid density, what does rapid density do? So the idea is that with this rapid density, with this idea of just flooding the market with additional units, what affordability options come out of that? Nothing, because as this study, the Vancouver study has shown, and many other studies have shown, actually density drives up prices. If you've ever been to New York City, you'll know what I'm talking about. There is no actual legitimate correlation between density and affordability. Of course, you know towns that are very dense and are cheap to live in, and the converse is true as well. But at the end of the day, there's no actual evidence that driving density increases affordability. What this idea of affordability based on density comes from is that if we flood the market with units, then everything is cheaper. That includes your house. Everything is less valuable. that is the idea behind flooding the market with units. Just so you know. So when you hear affordability tied to this, it's this supply and demand. If we just have lots more, everything is less valuable. All the equity that you have in your house today, all the work that you put in over the years. Yes, housing prices have gone up for a number of reasons, a very complex equation, which is not, I mean, very little to do with supply. But then that's the idea that people are pitching. Next slide, please. So 3A apartment buildings, what are these? There's a reason that this law includes an area that's this odd multi-block area. There's an odd configuration that's baked into this law, and it talks about no minimum occupancy. So no minimum bedroom size, no maximum number of bedrooms. It's very strict. This is not like your regular when you hear multifamily, the state wants to put many more multifamily housing near the MBTA. Well, that's not really what they're looking for. They're looking for a free pass, no special permit necessary to put in these buildings that have as many bedrooms as you can fit into them, basically. And that's whether it's an existing structure or whether it's a new building. So if you put this 3A district over open land, they can build these. If you put them over existing buildings, the state will work with that too. So if you put it over open land, you can expect something like this. This is a 5/1 or 4/1 that you would see in a place like Viens. If you've ever been in one of these, the bottom floor is concrete, and then the top several floors are, you can kind of hear through them if you're not requiring legacy materials in your town and your zoning code. You can expect it to not be a great experience to go into one of these. But essentially, there is no minimum bedroom size, no maximum number of bedrooms, which makes it really very rooming house-esque. If you put the zone over a existing building, a developer can cut this up, and that can be the entire thing or piecemeal. So this is a example of a building in Cambridge, 303 Harvard Street in Cambridge, where a developer has come in and changed the internal structure of this building from what was a 16 unit, 16 bedroom building to what is now a 16 bedroom, 50 bedroom configuration. Every unit, or every bedroom, I should say, has its own bathroom. So again, same number of units. These bedrooms are very small. Some of them are 8 by 10. You have to have at least 70 square feet if you're going to do a 1 bedroom unit. But that's allowable and encouraged under 3A. Is that a poor family? Not necessarily. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Next slide. So to your question, what is missing? And what's missing is affordability. And I'll get to what happened in California when they forgot to link their law to affordability in a second. But essentially, what this law says is that you can, Hamilton or Wenham, you can require 10% of these units to be affordable. But under 3A, affordable means you qualify for that 10% if you make 80% of the area median income or above. So in Hamilton, that means you have to make $110,593 a year in order to qualify for that 10% if Hamilton says, yeah, we do want to make 10% of these 3AA apartment buildings affordable. That is opposite of what 40B requires. You're already required to comply with 40B. 40B says that you have to have at least 10% affordable housing units in your town today. And if you don't, then a developer can come in and supersede your zoning laws, much like 3A. 40B says you have to have 10% of housing stock in your town for people making 80% or less of the area median income. It's really hard to comply with both, but they both essentially do the same thing. 40B is kind of a mess.
Less than 110,000 change.
That's 40B. 3A says you have to make 80% or more of the area median income to qualify for the 10% of affordable units that you can require in 3A apartment buildings.
That's below the poverty grid.
Yes, correct. Not income. So when they say affordability in 3A apartment buildings, that's not for low income people. You have to make $110,592 or more to qualify. It's essentially the same thing as the rest of the building.
I just had a quick question. What committee or what person has blessed us with 3A? I just want to know who I gotta go after. No, that's a serious question. It's certainly proposed it, and now towns are getting on board because they're uninformed. Who is responsible for this behemoth? Baker?
Baker signed it, but Governor Baker signed the 3-paragraph law in 2021, but the guidelines that determine how much money you have to make and how much area and how much units are all part of the guidelines the state housing department has written. And those are subject to change at their whim.
Thank you.
Well, I think that doesn't answer the question. His question was, how did we get to 3A?
Yeah.
3A is a state law passed by the legislature, and signed by the governor, which is, and it turns out, an unfunded mandate that forces towns to deal with this issue without any kind of incentive for waste, transportation, or education.
I mean, I think we can make a lot of speculation about that. I think ultimately there's been a huge push over time to have a regional planner at the state level, because when you, I see your brow furrowing, but this is actually a situation. So when the state has what 3A is control over a certain part of your town. It's a designated district, and you have to continually comply. You have to continually go back to the guidelines and work with the EOHLC to do what you're supposed to do to comply, or be sued, or have your grant money taken away. But essentially, this has been in the works for probably a very long time. If you look at the literature on this, and the rationale that the state put forth as the reason that they did this, it's because their past attempts at creating what really was probably more geared towards affordability didn't work. Well, they stripped the affordability piece out of 3A because they said that it had some amount of affordability in 3A that it would discourage development. So they actually had it in there and they stripped it out. So now we're just left with this piece of, like, it's just not well put together. Yes.
So did you say it was $110,000 a year for one apartment?
No, so you have to make that in order to qualify for the 10% of affordable units in a 3A apartment building if Hamilton or Wenham decides to require that 10% be affordable, but 3A says that you cannot make that 10% affordability for low income people. It says that you have to make it so that the people qualifying percent make 110, in Hamilton is $110,000 and 593 or $110,593 a year. 80% of income here in Hamilton. That's it.
Nothing would stop anyone from putting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people in an apartment.
Correct.
Right.
That's
So
correct.
it's a housing.
Not even.
Not the vertical. So there's a sanitary code
Yeah.
that says that you have to have 70 square feet for a one bedroom, for example.
We have no public setup, like this is, everybody's got tanks in their yards. They're gonna have to have a city septic.
Right, but if you have more than 2 people living in a bedroom, then it's only 50 square feet a person that's required.
We get.
By the sanitary code. Wow. So you can continue on from there, but essentially, like, for people living in, altogether. The, Suffolk County Jail doesn't follow that. There's 3 people in a 70 square foot cell, and that's state run, so who is going to?
There's no bunk beds.
Yeah. I'm looking at this, paper here, the thing, and one of the things I saw, I've been to every one of these meetings for the last 3 months. So every time there's something new, I like to hear about it. And it said, is this an affordable housing bill? And it says no, and it gives a good explanation. Did you write this?
No.
Because it ties in with what you're saying there. And this is something that's very, very important for people to know. Because in Rockport, we had a big effort to defeat this. And because
he had actually a little hour on this thing. And because we had an affordable housing trust committee formed by town meeting in 2017. But the selectmen in town never activated the committee. I think the genesis of that was that they felt that most people didn't want affordable housing in town and they would not vote for it. So they never activated it and nothing ever happened. 5 or 6 years later, I was on what we called a government bylaw committee, and our charge was to look at town bylaws and say, if nobody's following these things, we either should get rid of them or do something about it. And it forced the selectmen to at least activate a affordable housing committee. Now, the reason I mention that is because it still was about 6 or 7 years after the fact when they should have had the affordable housing initiatives being done on it before that. It wasn't. So what happened when this thing came through, this 3A thing, even though it says in this brochure here that it's can allow 10% affordable housing. When this bill came before the planning board in Rockport, there was no iota of affordable housing attached to it. It was simply, does the town want to do what the state wants us to do? And because of the delayed influence of that affordable housing trust that was figuring that they had to do something, they attached it to town meeting, got the town meeting moderator to say that this was legitimate amendments to the article that was being voted on, the 3A. And they pushed affordable housing as a portion of approving this 3A. So we would have probably defeated that 3A motion in Rockport if it hadn't been for the fact that some people on a delayed affordable housing trust wanted to do something to get 10%. So I'm just saying, the reason I'm going so long and winded about this is that probably without affordable housing thrown into the mix, we would have defeated it in Rockport. And it's a
Yeah. And this is all over the news, like this is the linchpin, right? But there is no affordable housing. In fact, I would argue that this kills affordable housing.
Yes.
For multiple reasons.
Can I-
Hamilton,
One little comment.
yes.
When Biden was running for president, he said, I will bring the cities into the suburbs and you can't do a thing about it. That's how I understand.
We can't do a thing about it for multiple reasons, and I'm sure Michael will get to that, and I'll touch on it. But, just go back and really quick, I'll say that Hamilton actually has a great affordability clause in your zoning, like, amazing. And my mother, full disclosure, happens to be on the town council, I forwarded to her because I'm like, how are we going to, combat this idea of 40B? Well, I've been saying, I had this, I thought I was original in my thought, until I read Hamilton's zoning code and I realized, oh, Hamilton's already got it figured out, we can just do that. Hamilton says, every 10th unit has to be affordable. If you're a developer, you have to make the 10th unit affordable, and then every 7th one after that has to be affordable. Pretty simple, right? And that allows you to comply with 40B. It's not going to be very copacetic with 3A, but that's the situation here in Hamilton. I love it, very simple. I've recommended it to others. So demand for 3A apartments. 3A assumes big families. Big families need lots and lots of bedrooms, maybe tiny bedrooms, everyone has their own bathroom. Really, at the end of the day, nobody can say you can only rent here and you can only live here if you're a family. That's highly illegal. So the problem, it could be a lot of roommates or what have you, but in actuality, in the United States, our family size has decreased quite significantly since 1960. Now it's gone from 4 people to 3 people. The MBTA is at 50% ridership since pre-COVID. That's not compact. It's not. Okay. Nobody wants to ride the T. No one takes like a lot of people don't take the T regularly to work anymore for obvious reasons. I put the excerpt here in the corner because this is a snippet out of the Attorney General's response to the initial Milton suit, and it says that it's based on a 2014 study. Obviously, lots has changed since 2014, and it says that they based their logic on this 2014 study, which says that we need 500,000 new units by 2040 to maintain our existing base of employment. I think this screenshot says it all. We're not tied to Boston anymore, and the T is in big trouble. It's nice. We're also 3A also assumes that people want micro units with everyone having their own bathroom. Really, at the end of the day, home buyers overwhelmingly prefer single-family homes. So 89% actually of home buyers prefer single-family homes. And in fact, millennials, who make up the bulk of home buyers, 74% of them prefer single-family homes. And they're looking for homes with 100 square feet or more, with a living room, with a yard. And even though the number of single-family homes that is getting built is smaller, it still remains the biggest portion of what people are buying out there today. So this slide shows what people are buying. This is from a 2022 study in real estate home buyers. I have the quote if you're interested, I'm sure Mike will pass around the deck. But no matter how little we built, and I think in 2022 we 61% of the homes that we built were single family. Nonetheless, this is what people bought. Next slide, please.
The green is single family, right?
Right, correct. Okay. Yes, thank you. Cost of compliance. So Michael mentioned, or maybe it was John mentioned, the Salem letter. So this is just a snippet of that. There's a few of these online if you're interested. When I first read the Salem letter, my heart went into my stomach. It felt like they had really signed their life away. And each one of these letters is really sort of tailored to the extent that the state has kind of cherry picked once this district is designated and they've submitted their zone to the state says, great, you've complied, and here's your letter of compliance, and then it details out the, what's remaining. What I found interesting about the Salem letter is it really picks on them for being historic, and it has some points in there about if you try to make anything else historic, we will ding you for X, Y, Z reasons. But so this is one of the last paragraphs in the letter. It basically says that you will have to continue to comply. We can change these guidelines whenever we feel like it. And if you do not adjust things accordingly, you will be deemed out of compliance. And as you know, what that means today is that we can take your funding or we can sue you. Next slide. This talks about the MAPC. I know John mentioned that there are nonprofits right now in our midst that are funded for to encourage our compliance with 3A, and they come in a variety of forms. But essentially, the MAPC, the
Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Metropolitan Area Planning Council has developed this 3A suitability map. Every town, every lot, your lot is on this map. You can click on it and you can see your residential capacity. You can see your zone, your development feasibility on this map. Obviously, this is a map of Hamilton, and I have a little snippet of what metrics you can find. Last time it was purchased, who owns it, your name is going to be on this map. It's wild. This is essentially a map that I guess is supposed to indicate for a town where is the best place to put this district and where is the most suitable 3A zone. A lot of them I'm seeing happening here on single family homes. So we're looking at that. Next slide. This is my last one. Just looking ahead before I turn this over to Michael. Please, despite all of this that I have said, do not be sad. Is like a good way of putting it. In the Milton case, the Attorney General asked the justice to expedite her request to give her the ability to appoint a special master and get on with her business of making sure that all these other towns were in compliance. And the justice in that case, Justice Georges, said, no, I'm not going to do that because there's novel questions of law here that we've never seen before. And we're going to actually put this before a full panel of the Supreme Court justices. And we're going to send out a request for amicus briefs from the experts in the field, including Attorney Michael Walsh. And we are going to try to understand what is being asked here, because this is not normal. So that put a really bad damper on her plans to just push this through. It was a bad day for her. There's also federal class action with over 300 people, and as Michael said, 18 towns and cities. It's unprecedented pushback for this law. And California recently rejected a similar attempt to essentially end single-family only zoning, which is just a really interesting outcome. So 5 towns sued essentially the state for the same thing, a law that allowed cities to their family zones, and they won. Research, write, ask questions, write to your planning board, write to your council, write to your senators, and vote and show up, because that is our right. That is where our power comes from. this is a state that was founded on our liberties, and it wasn't that long ago. At the end of the day, we've gotten comfortable, we trusted our government to do the right thing, and they haven't. So we get a say, because there's priorities. Like, please remember that.
Government and developers.
Exactly. Government, by the people, for the people, of the people, that's not gone away. That's still the situation, and it's not going away. This is the United States of America. So also remember that the Attorney General, who is suing towns, seems to have forgotten, and although it also seems to feel she's above the law herself, so she's also exempt, seems to have forgotten that not zoning is not a crime. There are crimes that she's not guaranteeing. Computer fraud, or a number of other things. This is not a crime. You are not criminals. We are not criminals. We are law-abiding citizens who pay our taxes and don't deserve to be dragged into court for not overbuilding our towns. And I'll also say that the nation is watching. So what has happened in California is very interesting. I think we've learned a lot from their mistakes. But at the end of the day, everyone knows that what is happening here is wildly unprecedented, and we can tell the rest of the nation that the buck stops here, because at the end of the day, we actually don't have anywhere else to go. So if our land is changed in a way that is not suitable, a lot of us don't have additional properties out there somewhere to go to. And those will be compromised at some point too. But eventually our towns will look like something that we didn't sign up for. So we have to be very vigilant about this, because it will spread. So that's all I have to say.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Walsh. I'm an attorney. That's bad news. There's more bad news. I represent John Kolackovsky. He is the gentleman who spoke earlier in that awful Hawaiian shirt. We've been going around from town to town warning people about the shirts. I haven't gotten any feedback yet, but it'll come. In representing Mr. Kolackovsky in 20, up to and Mr. Kolackovsky, with his friends who are working with several over here, filed a lawsuit against the Lockport's first attempt to comply. They enacted a TOVID bylaw, which was a transit-oriented village overlay district. And in our lawsuit, we're essentially pitching that Section 3A is unconstitutional under the state home rule amendment. The home rule amendment was adopted in 1966. It is it changed. Before the home rule amendment came in, towns, any regional government you could think of, counties, regional school districts, were creatures of the state. And so they were subject to being changed, overridden, preempted, but whenever the state wanted, however the state wanted. The home rule amendment changed that. It fundamentally gave towns their own right to exist, and with it, their own right to have their own zoning power. In Section 6 of the Home Rule Amendment, the state constitution talks about your right as a citizen in a town to have the town exercise the local police power, to pass laws for your health, education, and welfare, to do things that are your town laws. This is essentially the power that if you want to be trendy like Brookline and you want to ban dip bottles or cigarettes to kids under 21 or plastic shopping bags, you can do that. If you want to be a farm town, you can do that. If you want to be a busy seaport, you can do that. And it's all through your use of the police power, which includes fundamentally zoning. This is the Home Rule Amendment. This is the actual return of votes from 1966 when the Home Rule Amendment was adopted. It was adopted overwhelmingly by about 5-1. There were more than 1 million voters who voted for it, and that was a lot of people back in 1966. Oh, go ahead. Hit me again. Sorry, I'm talking too fast. I'm trying to make sure I get out of here, or importantly, make sure that I get to your questions. Section 1 of the Home Rule Amendment zones in on the fact that this is designed to ensure your local independence and liberty. This is a quote in the center here from Section 1 of the Home Rule Amendment. And it says, the Home Rule Amendment is adopted to reaffirm the customary and traditional with respect to the conduct of the local government and to confirm to the people in every city and town the right of self-government to local matters. This means that you can decide in your town what's good for you. If you want to be a seaport, you can do that. Linfield is a bedroom community. We have, other than one big shopping mall, we have almost no industry, no business. Everyone works either at home or in some other town. Rockport is a tourist town. Gloucester is a harbor port. Hamilton, Wenham have a healthy body of equestrian sports, polo clubs and things like that. You get to be in your town and live in the town that you want to live in. And this is what the Constitution guarantees that to you. The state has only limited power to tell cities and towns what they have to do. Now, the state is allowed to preempt some things like building codes where we as a society want to have uniform rules. But when they preempt, they only tell the towns, we got this, you can't legislate in this area. But that isn't zoning. Zoning is inherently local, as you already heard. It is an exercise of drawing a district, is saying that around this legion coast here, we're going to have only residential buildings or industry, what have you. Those are inherently local choices, and they're committed by constitution to your local town meeting. Again? After the home rule amendment was put into effect, there were a series of cases in the 1970s where they tried to figure out what it means, because it fundamentally changed the paradigm of relationships between the state and federal government, or well, between the towns and the states, similar to that between the states and the federal government. These cases overwhelmingly confirm that zoning is a local power, that cities and towns exercise under Section 6 of the Home Rule Amendment, and that they have the right to make their own choices. For example, the quote here is a second repository of local zoning powers exists by virtue of Section 6 of the Home Rule Amendment. And then the breakdown says the town's police power be based on an independent statutory delegation or the town's independent local power. So for those of you who were hearing about the law earlier, let's take a little bit about the law. It's a 3-paragraph law. It's very simple. It was passed in the middle of a 192-page economic development bill in 2021 by Governor Baker in January, which was pulled over from the prior year's session. It has 3 paragraphs. In the first paragraph, it says every one of the MBTA communities, there are 177 of them, have to have a district of reasonable size within half a mile of mass transit. And in the statute, the guidelines are a little different. It says basically, if you were in a mass transit is boat, bus, subway, or rail, or being next to a town served by boat, bus, subway, or rail.
Everybody.
Well,
Half the state, sort of.
more or less. So the second paragraph goes on to say that if you don't have one of these districts of reasonable size, then you are ineligible for 4 specific grants. There's the Mass Works grant, there's the Housing Choice grant, there's 2 others whose names personally escape me, you'll forgive me. And then the third paragraph of the law gives jointly to the Mass Transportation Department, in the MBTA, as well as the State Housing Department, the right to set some guidelines for how to determine what you comply with the rules. When the State Housing Department got this mandate, they sort of jumped out of their skin, because how do you determine if 177 districts across half of the state comply? So they set out a folding schedule where cities and towns wouldn't have to comply except for Sheets deadlines. Rapid transit had to comply by the end of 2023. Most cities and towns that are served by rail or adjacent to rail have to comply by the end of 2024. And then those really small towns like West Newbury don't have to comply by the end of So they came up with what they call interim compliance. Basically, there's this 5-page form that if someone in your town hall, and it doesn't necessarily require any democratic endorsement, it can be your planner, it can be a public official, it can be the chairman of the planning board or the chairman of the board of selectmen. It does not require any public input or any public buy-in. It just requires someone in some position of authority to sign the 5-page form and say, these are the steps that we're going to take over the next year or 2 years to try to get to compliance. And then as long as you submit this form to the state, they will say that you're in compliance. That's when you hear the governor go out and say 175 of 177 cities and towns are in compliance. That means someone at town hall filled out a form. That's what it means. Doesn't mean the public wanted it, doesn't mean anyone voted on it. It just means they agreed they would plan to how to comply.
Is that public information?
It is. All of those plans are posted. There is only one town that wouldn't submit it. It's the town of Holden. The town manager is an attorney, and he intends to go get him straight. Next slide, if you don't mind. Yes, sir.
Can I ask you about that form?
Sure.
I found the box checked on the state site, and I couldn't find a plan anywhere. I asked the town about it. It's called the town of Hamilton. Nobody knew anything about it. The other thing, for people, as far as, anything in the schools that school building authority, nobody knows it, there's a spot in there for comments. The town's not sending the comments in, send your own comments in.
So to ask about forms, all the forms for all 175 towns that submitted them are up online. One of the interesting points that I found out in the last couple of days, I thought I'd mention, you already heard earlier from Attorney Viens that Boston is exempt. The Greater Boston Housing Report Card put out jointly by the Dukakis Center at Northeastern, Center for Urban Studies Northeastern, and the Greater Boston Housing Foundation, put out a report card in 2023 about the state of the housing rental market in Massachusetts. And they, in the top changers, Boston was the biggest mover in multifamily housing, and that's because between 2018 and 2023, they lost more than 1,000 units of multifamily housing. And they're exempt. Isn't that cool?
They lost.
They lost. They had approximately 1,800 units of multifamily housing as counted by the Greater Boston Housing Fund, and they went down to 1,703.
So who bought them?
No, they just fell out of existence. Someone bought them and they used them for something else.
Yeah.
Commercial space was whole, but that was pre-pandemic, it was partially pre-pandemic, so one never knows quite how that shakes out. So this is one of the larger quotes from one of the lower cases on the home rule. And it basically goes on to say that zoning is the local power. It's committed to your town meeting. So in that 3-paragraph law, when it says a city or town shall vote, what it means is that your local legislative assembly, which towns like Hamilton and Wenham that are open town meetings, that means you, the voters, in direct democracy. You, the voters, are supposed to vote this in. One of the arguments that we made in the lawsuit is that the state housing department is trying to increase the penalty. So without any further authorization from the legislature, which only mentioned 4 specific grants if you do not comply, they've tried to add 13 other grants, including environmental grants, homeland security grants, climate resilient grants, because, you know, if you have a town that's like resilient or not cooperating with state vision, you really want to limit their access to consultant studies that will let them look further in the future and prepare better forward, because that's the kind of forward-thinking thing that we really want to do. One of the things that we're arguing, there's a doctrine, when lawyers interpret documents, as Attorney Wright can tell you, we tend to use what are called the canons of statutory construction. The canons of statutory construction, how lawyers determine what contracts or documents or statutes mean. There are a bunch of common law rules. One of the more famous ones is, forgive me, my Latin is terrible. It's something like expressio unius alteris exclusus. The expression of one thing is the exclusion of all others. So basically, the argument goes, if the legislature, your elected representatives, went to trouble specifying 4 specific grants as consequence for not complying, what businesses of any state agency to add other consequences or to hold your non-compliance against you in any other manner? I think that's a pretty fair argument. I've never had a problem explaining that to the average voter thus far. So what? That'll come back in a second. One of the other arguments we're making is these guidelines are unfair. So everything that you've heard about bedrooms, about the sanitary code, about the number of units you have to have, about the number of acres you have to have, those are all in the guidelines. The guidelines, depending on how you count, can come out to about 40 pages. They are promulgated exclusively by the state housing department. When we were up in front of, forgive me, I was standing there up in front of the judge last week to try and defend our argument, and tears came to my eyes, mostly because I was standing there next to him in one of these awful white shirts. But the state literally stood up and said that we didn't submit these for public comment, and we don't have to, and we don't think that we need to. Under the Administrative Procedures Act, we have, that's chapter 38, not to be confused with 40A. Generally speaking, if you're going to have any kind of a rule, a regulation, a rate, any kind of a rule at all that affects public rights, not internal to the government, you have to put it through notice and comment. You have to allow the public to comment. You have to allow them to come to a hearing. And then if you don't accept the public's comments, you have to explain why. And it's all supposed to be subject to judicial review. They don't want to do that. They say they don't have to. And we think that chapter 38 is pretty clear. The state argues that because they're guidelines, they don't have to submit them to public comment and they're not subject to judicial review. I thought that was a kind of a strange argument. One of the other arguments that they've made in our lawsuit is that they argue that the public has no right to expect the government to do its job And that they breach no duty if they don't, meaning that no one can make them do it. I thought that was the whole reason to have lawyers. It's a little late for me to change a lot of my career, but so it goes. One of the other arguments that we're making in our lawsuit is that forgive me, one of the modern trends in politics is if you don't like the outcome, change the process to make the outcome easier to get what you want. So one of the other things the economic development bill is it changed the zoning law. Normally, to pass a zoning at town meeting or even at a city council, you have to have a 2/3 majority vote of the local legislative assembly, which in towns is a town meeting. They've lowered it to half for 4 favorite things, which includes the adoption of as of right accessory dwelling units, the adoption of 40R smart growth districts. It also includes the adoption of MBTA zoning. And then there's one kind of small exception, which is number 4 in section 5 of chapter 40A, which extends to any change in zoning that increases the production of housing. I thought this was really cool, but the Attorney General has the Attorney General approves all bylaws, for those of you who don't know, in towns, not cities, just towns. And the Attorney General has interpreted this new lowering of the threshold from 2/3 to a simple majority in the 4th paragraph to apply even to small things like setbacks. Essentially now, for anything that would increase housing, if you're changing a zone from residential to, or from industrial to residential, from commercial to residential, if you're doing anything that will increase housing, as far as the Attorney General reads this new law, you no longer have to have 2/3, you only have to go down to half. And they've already approved about 25 bylaws in the last year and a half or 2 years using this lower quantum threshold so that you only have to get to 2/3. It's not really applicable here, or rather I should say it's not clear. There is a petition process where if you get a certain number of landowners to sign, 50% of the people affected by the district change or within 100 yards, you're theoretically allowed to bump the vote threshold back up to 2/3. However, this provision of law hasn't been interpreted. It says on its face that it applies to cities or towns that have a council, but it doesn't, which would tend to indicate elected representatives. But when we talked to the folks in Rowley, they decided, they looked at it, they have lawyers, they looked at it, they thought about it, and they thought like I do that there was no reason that it couldn't apply to towns in town meeting too. So they went out and they got the 2/3, the signatures to bump it up to 2/3, and they're hoping to require it to pass 2/3. The Attorney General does not agree with that in her approvals of municipal bylaws in the last year and a half, but there it is for whatever it's worth. Beyond that, one of the other arguments that we are making in our lawsuit is this gentleman earlier here talked about unfunded mandate. Does anybody here familiar with Proposition 2.5? You live in an open town meeting, you should be.
Yes.
So Proposition 2.5 really was a deal. The taxes wouldn't go up by more than 2.5% without a ballot vote, no matter what it does. But part of the deal was the state would just stop dumping unfunded mandates on cities and towns that costs the local tax base. And so as a result of this, there's this mechanism where you can petition either the state auditor or 10 citizens can go to court and argue that it's an unfunded mandate. And if you prove to the court's satisfaction that it's an unfunded mandate, the law does not go into effect into any city or town where its implementation is not funded by the state in full. It doesn't apply to incidental costs. And we're arguing with the Attorney General now about whether having to adopt one of these zoning bylaws is an incidental cost or not. But I assure you that Mr. Kolackovsky has 10 friends in Rockport, despite those Hawaiian shirts. And so we're hoping to be able to argue that this law is not under Chapter 29, Section 27C, for those of you keeping statutory references, entitled to go into effect unless the state is going to stump up the money. I think the state knows this, so they've started to pass technical assistance grants that are available. For those of you who have looked at how to comply, or those of you who may be in government, this kind of law is ridiculously difficult to comply with. And my best evidence for that is the town of Rockport passed a bylaw that was for 32 acres in 2022, and it wasn't good enough. They had to come back in May of 2024 to pass a bigger district with more units. As a matter of fact, the units that they authorized would double the number of houses in the area, which I found was astonishing. Even if you think this law is the greatest thing for sliced bread, it is really hard to comply with, partly because the guidelines keep changing. Part of the difficulty for the state housing department, if you submitted these guidelines with these acreage formulas and unit formulas, in public comment is that if you want to change it, you can't just type it up on your word processor and send it out. You've got to engage in this months-long process, and it's subject to being reviewed and everything. Right now, the state can change the guidelines at a whim, and they have already changed them at least 4 times. Matter of fact, they've already changed them enough. They have major and minor revisions. The last major revision was to address significant fears that that because most trains are in the center of most small towns, and where the business districts are, or the downtowns, that you would have these large multifamily units that would push out small businesses in the center of town. So they've sort of begrudgingly tried to soften the impact on any area where you have mixed use. But I'll tell you, just as something of well, for those who didn't know, I'm an NIMBY. If you've heard of snob and zoning, that's me. I'm a snob. I went to town meeting at 11 with my parents to fight a 40B in my backyard for citizenship merit badge, in fact. Actually, for those who haven't heard this before, the new term in academic circles for NIMBYs is actually not NIMBY, it's moved on to bananas, which is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. I found that in an academic journal, that was the coolest thing ever. So in terms of the formulas, it's really hard to comply. The state has created a list of about 20 pre-selected consultants, and if you want to, you can either use a state-funded think tank like MAPC or the Merrimack Valley Planning Council, or you can use one of the state consultants using a state grant to try and minimize the impact on your city or town. But even if you want to comply, it's really difficult. It's really hard. Several cities and towns, as they've tried to comply, have tried to take shortcuts. The way Rockport did it is they just do an overlay district. They left all the underlying zoning the same. So you can live in single family residence, and then maybe you, or maybe your neighbor, or maybe neither of you are underneath the umbrella of this overlay district. Overlay districts conceptually are only supposed to tighten the restrictions in certain areas for specific reasons. The most famous example is watershed protection or wetlands protection for the environment. And so it's natural to say, well, yes, you're in a single family, you're in residence A acre zoning, but because you happen to back up to the conservation area, you're subject to some tighter requirements than your neighbor across the street. That makes some sense. We're now creating enclaves, holes in the districts where you're not subject to the zoning rule unless you want to be, which is kind of counterintuitive because the folks who argue for this argue that we need more housing production, and the way to do that is to take off the barriers. For those who hadn't picked this out earlier, if you build within one of these districts, which are supposed to be within half a mile of the mass transit station if possible, or anywhere in town if you don't have a train station nearby, you have the right to build as of right zone. That means the town cannot tell you no. The town can make sure that you have certain basic geographic parameters, but the parameters have to be designed to allow you to build up to 15 units per acre. If you think about, let's say, Winfield, I'm told that when quarter-acre lots are a luxury big, and I'm from Winfield, I think quarter-acre lots are really small. But if you had 3 triple-deckers or 4 triple-deckers on quarter-acre lots, that would only give you 12 units in your acre. You don't have enough zoning. So this really is designed to encourage tall, multi-level, primarily apartments. The other reason that, well, I should tell you that we have a second lawsuit, a federal lawsuit, because Rockport, after they tried to comply in 2022, goofed it, and so they had to draw a new district in 2024. And so we filed to argue under the federal constitution that this violates the protection clause under a case called Lingle, where you have to reasonably be able to connect the impact of your restriction to the interest, the constitutional interest that you are trying to promote. The case Diana cited earlier from California, that was exactly the reason that the court had struck down. Basically, what happened is they passed a rule that essentially tried to make single-family zoning illegal. They tried to encourage heavily duplexes, but the rationale for it was affordable housing, and they couldn't produce enough evidence in court to say that duplexes will promote or increase affordable housing. It just makes more houses. At least that's what the court in Los Alameda said, whatever it's worth. Beyond that, I'm getting the face here. I think I haven't made enough Ryan shirt jokes. Plus, it's also getting late. I know I only get 2 minutes, so I promise I'm going to finish in a minute. And then this slide was, what can you do? Mostly it was a glorified picture to make a Nancy Reagan joke, because I think just saying no is cool. My dad used that as anything in the sun that we were growing up. The ultimate purpose that we wanted to tell you is that you have to adopt this. The state, in its arguments against us, has argued in our lawsuit, they've argued that they have the supreme power of zoning. And they argue that if they wanted to, they could just go ahead and draw these districts. To which the answer is right at the Clint Eastwood, go ahead, make my day. And they won't do it. The legislature redistricts every 10 years. If the legislature wanted to draw maps, they know how. They know lots of guys who make lots of maps. They're invariably in favor of the political incumbent or what have you, if you read the redistricting stuff. The legislature can do this if they wanted to, and I think it's quite telling that they didn't. They're trying to tell you that you have to, but when a challenge on it, their defense is, oh, well, I could do it if I wanted to, but you really ought to. And that, I think, is telling about going back to that home rule idea that you control your local zoning. Only you can determine what your community should look like. For those of you who have heard the old aphorism that democracy is government by people who show up, that's really true, particularly at town meeting. If you have 200 friends, you can come through and raise the budget or lower as you see fit. You have the right to control your town government and control your world. And if you don't use it, you lose it. We were trying to pitch to you, now keep in mind, I'm partisan. I am against 3A. I'm litigating against it. I will tell you facts, but I'm going to spin them my way. But you have the right to say no at town meeting. And I highly encourage you to use it. You have a question, sir.
Yes, I heard another 3A presentation, and there was a representative there from the legislature, and he said it's possible in the court hearing that because 40B has been in existence, and that was like a subvert of the zoning rights, that the Supreme Court could make that like, well, why didn't you sue us on that?
The Attorney General, in part of their argument against us, argued that because Chapter 40B was enacted after the Home Rule Amendment went into effect, and it doesn't violate the Home Rule Amendment, that 40A shouldn't either. The answer, well, see, these are some of the finer points of Home Rule, and I'm trying to keep this high level so I don't bore anybody, because you could write treatises about the Home Rule, and only poli-sci students can stay awake enough to get through them. Even I fall asleep, and I think myself is pretty hardy. So generally speaking, if any of you are familiar with the 10th Amendment, we have a rule called the anti-commandeering rule, and it says that the federal government can't make the states do stuff. They can incentivize it, they can give grants to encourage it, but they can't force it. Even if it's a good idea, even if the state could do it anyway, or even if the federal government could itself do it anyway, it cannot at all force the states to do it because they are sovereign entities. We're taking the position that the Home Rule Amendment does the same thing for municipalities that the 10th Amendment does for the states at the federal level. We're arguing that even if you have to go to the gallows and have a really high dense district in the middle of your downtown, that they cannot make you do it. And it's basically the difference between having to go to the gallows or having to erect your own gallows and then walk to it. And I'm telling you, it's not a small difference. In law, in principle, or anything under the sun, someone trying to make you do something is always a little suspect in government. Yes, by all means.
I was wondering if you can address, please, the lawsuit. I know that there's citizens in this community that joined the class action, and we've been told by people in our government, that our town government, that was thrown out and is no longer relevant and not to worry about it. So they're just waiting on the Milton thing. They just discard that as a concept. So if you could address that. And also, I understand that there's an agency, a 501c4 that was created called One Commonwealth, Inc. That has just shut up, it's just turned off, but if you could address sort of how that's going to be, if you could address how that's going to be impacting our, our towns, because it's being funded by the government and to be used against people, citizens, that'd be great.
So as for the Hamilton lawsuit, we collected committees from about 18 cities and towns that wanted to join our lawsuit as a class. Three communities, Marblehead, Hamilton, and one more, I think it might have been Millbury, filed directly with the Superior Court. there is a conflict of rules, and this is really technical, and I don't want to bore you, but the short answer is someone called the technical file. Rule 23 of the Rules of Civil Procedure has its own rule governing service. It tells you where you have to serve the opponent and when you serve the court. And Rule 23 in the Rules of Civil Procedure says one thing, and then Rule 9A of the Superior Court says something completely different. Rule 9A of the Superior Court says that you have to, before you file with the court, you have to serve the opponent, and then they have to put their opposition and then send it back to you, and you file it in one big package. The clerk, the clerk, with the judge's consent, dismissed Hamilton's motion without prejudice because it wasn't 9A. And as a matter of law, there's open question as to whether Rule 23 governs because it's the more specific rule or whether Rule 9A governs. But it doesn't really matter because we have moved to make it a class to include everybody who filed, and your motion went in as an appendix to our motion, which means that it is fair game for the court to consider. The court will consider it. We talk about when and where and whether we have a separate hearing on the class certification. To the extent that anyone has told you to ignore our lawsuit as regards the validity of 3A, that is first talking. Yes.
I just want to say quickly, because I filed the motion for Hamilton, so we were on a super tight deadline, and it did go through my head, oh, Superior Court, Rule 9A. But there was no time to comply. I was also thinking, we're not a party to the action, so 9A may not apply to us. So I was like, but even, we didn't have time, because you have to serve the other side 10 days in advance.
Yes.
And then file the 9A package, which is like 6 other documents for service process on the other side. There was just no time to comply with it, so I don't know, we took a shot in the dark.
It's gonna count.
It's gonna happen.
Plus, there's a rule conflict with Rule 23, so I wouldn't have blamed you even if you did it the right way. The second one, for those who don't know, there are approximately 15 towns that have either voted 3A down or have voted to postpone it with an eye towards either not complying or delaying long enough to see what happens. Milton. 15 towns, we'll call it the resist or no category. And then depending on how you count, so the governor says 175 are in interim compliance. The state housing department says that if you add in those who have either submitted guidelines, bylaws that are waiting to see if they comply or have already been approved, the state housing department figures there's about 70 towns that are complying. And I'll tell you that if you measure it based on the Attorney General's approval of the bylaws under Chapter 40, Section 32, there are only about 15 towns that have complied. So I'm going to call the yes and no's dead even. I am reading it my way, just because I can, but using that benchmark, the yes and no's on the cities and towns are dead even as I see it. Because of this, the governor had a little bit of a panic, and she went out and she did something that's novel. This Commonwealth has never seen anything like it. She chartered a 501c4, a federally regulated political advocacy organization, to try and encourage pro-housing policies at the local level, including 3A. One of the immediate criticisms that this got in the newspapers was that 501c4s, because they're political organizations like Citizens United, do not have to disclose their donors. They don't answer to anybody. They're essentially black holes for money to go in and advocate causes. Well, no, the rule applies on both sides. I mean, it goes both ways. But in terms of the realist, you asked about its impact. The governor's charity, not charity, political advocacy organization, 501c3, 501c, you already go down the route. The 501c4 that she founded is called One Commonwealth Inc. It is actually going to be helmed by the Lieutenant Governor's Chief of Staff and her former campaign manager. So this is a high priority for her and for the Lieutenant Governor. In terms of its impact, it is not clear, but I have been asked for a preliminary opinion, and I'm not sure, but I think that if they're not very, very careful, they may bump up against Chapter 55, which is the state's campaign and political finance rule. The campaign and political finance rule has funky applications to the local level. If any of you have ever had like the PTA stick pro-school budget money conflict flyers and kids' backpacks, send them home, OCPF routinely gets complaints that violates the campaign political finance rules, and it does, because it's the use of public resources at a local level. On the other hand, you can spend lots of money you can't spend outrageous amounts of money. You can't spend unlimited money at a town ballot, but the rules are a lot less strict at a town meeting. So it's a little odd, and I'm not exactly sure of all legalities, but I think that this may, if they're, unless they're very careful, run afoul of the campaign finance law.
Questions?
The hope is we're kind of a small group here and there seems to be a lot of the same people that attend these meetings, whether it's the school committee or town committee. The one thing that came out very clearly at the last meeting that I went to about 10 days ago was that only about 5% of the Hamilton Wenham area actually gets out there and votes in election. And that's sad because just about 700 people total. So I implore all of us who are passionate about saving our land and saving our small town and not urbaning our suburban to really talk to your friends and get them to vote and get them to get involved as much as they can, because it's only 700 people that are out there voting, and there's so many more people I think that really care. And in addition to that, one of the men on one of the committees actually admitted to someone that I know that this is 100% a land grab. It is 100% meant to tax the people out of their homes who cannot afford what it's going to cost us, not only for the school, but for all these other things that are going to be happening. And our town cannot sustain it nor support it. And we need to really get our friends and neighbors and everyone who cares about these towns involved as much as we can, because 700 people for nothing. It's a joke. I mean, we're 14,000 strong. So let's get as many people as we can on board, knowledgeable. Perhaps we could do a small mailing with easy bullet points. Don't list any laws. Just this is what it's gonna do, and keep it simple, stupid, and make it so basic.
We're 100% spoiled.
Hope that we can all corral our friends and you know, get it going on. And you know what? They're gonna use, he even admitted that they're gonna use the same list because they found it to be a pretty, a list that encompassed the looks of the town. And they're going to continue to use the same list of 300 people to ask them by phone that they're going to be charging, I mean, they're going to be surveying. It's going to cost this town $12,500. They voted it right away. It's going to cost approximately $350 for each survey. Of the same people they've been surveying for years. And what they ought to do is just pull blind names out of a bucket and call. But they're doing the same old stuff, and you get the same results.
Let me just make a comment. So I just wanted to say, I learned one thing tonight is that as a town, we can choose not to comply. And really the cost of that is we lose 4 grants. So
28,000.
I don't know what the grants are, but it just seems to be, how do we choose not to comply? Because I don't think, and I've not heard of the town putting out a vote to the people saying, do we want to comply? It sounds like other towns have. So what's the process to have the town ask the people?
The process is that there's gonna be a vote, I guess it's gonna be in the fall, I heard. Which is a little surprising. This kind of thing that you would really put up in springtime town meeting, although the fall special town meeting does happen pretty much every year, so fair enough. There's going to be a special town meeting that hopefully you're gonna go through a vote on this item. And everyone here is inaugural.
That's not just.
So-
And we're able to demonstrate for April of 2025.
Okay. In April, I apologize.
With the school, they're tied together. So when we go to the ballots in April, it's going to be about a ballot about the zoning changes and about the school. And when someone said, oh, everyone's thinking about Winthrop and it's gonna be 700, like maybe it'll only be 5 acres, someone would say, "Hey, great." I'm just saying that they are connected and that when the lease was renewed, because I studied that meeting, And the lease was renewed only for 5 years for Winthrop and for 50 years for Cutler. It was done specifically by the board, the select board, saying, we want to free up, we want to signal our support to this plan at Cutler and to free up and develop Winthrop. So they are connected, and it's on the video, so anyone can slice it and see it, how they chose to do that. And the lease drove the school decision to not do anything with Winthrop and only focus on how do we develop Cutler. So they're intimately connected, so don't let anyone tell you that they're not. And so it's really important. So when we hear about the school, if you get the survey, it came by text. It's coming by text to a lot of people.
Got it today.
So answer it, and so it's going to a lot of people by text, so maybe it's a cheaper way. Just know that they are connected, and that if we only think about developing Winthrop for 700, and that then they'll come back and say, well, let's just do it for 150 or 200. They're gonna think we're gonna have a deal, like, well, great, I stopped 700. So
Yeah.
just be aware of that.
Yeah, and I just want to say one thing too, we learned a lot from Milton. Milton showed up in droves, not just for their vote to turn this down, the plan that was in front of them, but to actually get the signatures required to kick off that vote. They had to get 5,000 signatures in, 7 days, and they got 1,100, some astronaut, 7,000 in 3 days, something like that. And that kicked off the vote. I mean, people came out in droves, not just to sign on to require a vote by the people, which is astronomical in itself, but then in a special election, not a regular election with candidates as scheduled, in a special election, there were lines out the door, and it was a record-breaking number of votes that people showed up for. So people will show up for this once they understand what's happening. Also, I just want to mention this idea that the budget, right? Like, states actually only have so much money. We hear about the federal government and budget deficits, and that's just like normal to us now. But states actually don't. States have to both balance their budget. And when you think about it, I heard this recently. It's like a balloon, right? Like you squeeze one side of the balloon, and it's one side shrinks. And that's for schools, that's for roads, that's for infrastructure and things like that. Like money comes out of our needs in order to fund stuff like 3A. It's not okay, and it's one Commonwealth is also not okay. I'll also say this: when you hear Michael mention this idea of this overlay being less restrictive, you often hear this term like unlock this ability to build whatever on this area. You are basically signing up to bypass your own rights. You don't get a vote, you don't get a say about what goes in your neighborhood. If the zone is over a single family home neighborhood, these are odd structures. These are no minimum bedroom size, no maximum number of bedrooms in neighborhoods. So if someone is proposing this in a 3A district, and it happens to be in an area that's mostly single family homes, basically what that says is that you don't have to get special permission, or the developer doesn't have to get special permission to build something like that. They can just do it by right. And you don't get to go to a planning board hearing, and you don't get to say no, even if it's next door to you. You're unlocking the ability for developers to do that. And then I also want to say, I've also heard a new acronym in the last couple of days, YEBI. Have you heard this?
Yes.
Yes, in your backyard. So that's a new one. And I think that kind of sums it up, right? Like the people that you're hearing say this, and we have an MAPC employee in our town, they don't want this in their neighborhood, on their house. And they have come up with several arguments as to why it doesn't make sense for their neighborhood. They don't want this in their area. They want it in yours.
They exempted.
Excuse me, I want to say one thing. You got a small group here, okay? I could talk sometimes too. You got a small group here.
Not with that shirt.
Anyway, you probably know, or you could talk to 10 neighbors. Each one of you could talk to 10 neighbors and 10 friends and explain the situation. That's how you multiply the people coming to these town meetings. you do have a lot of power, and you do know people, even if you don't know, it's a nice time to walk over to somebody's house and just introduce yourself and talk about what you're concerned about.
I said it earlier, you did fine.
Hey, really?
I have a question, Counselor.
Sort of.
Counselor, I have a question.
Yes,
This very nice woman just confused the hell out of me.
okay.
Why did Milton have to go get signatures?
So Milton is what's called a representative town meeting.
Well, let me be clear. So I'm interested in Milton, but so in our town, this has to go what, special town meeting? This is gonna be on special town meeting. Right.
It has to go through town meeting
Do we have to
and
collect signatures or we do have to collect 12,000 signatures?
you do not have to collect signatures.
It was to overturn what.
Yes.
So
It just confused me.
It's a different setup, so.
Milton elects their town meeting members. For every 50 or 100 households, they elect a town meeting member,
Okay.
like you would a city councilor. And because it's one step removed from democracy, like if you had a city council, our state laws require that any representative town meeting in town have a referendum process. Where once the town meeting has done something, if the voters think it's really stupid, the voters can put together a drive and force a ballot out. There is one town out in Western Mass that has had it in November. Have decided to put on their November state ballot with the presence on it, an advisory question about whether it's a good idea to comply with this. And that is actually something that if your town officials were interested in doing, you could still do, timing wise. But yes, if Hamilton or Wenham intend to comply and haven't already complied, because your deadline is December 2024, and the town meeting season, and there is a season for it under state law, chapter 39, sections 10 and 11, you would have to have a special town meeting, which means I assume that they will at least attempt to comply, which means you will have one this fall.
So we have, in Wenham, we have one anyway. You would think if they do this by such special town meeting in the fall, that this is kind of backdooring town meeting. They're gonna probably do it in the spring. Well, anyway, the answer to this gentleman's question then, all we need to do is go to our respective town meetings and vote no on this.
That is the best and simplest method.
But we gotta get it on the ballot first.
No.
Get on the ballot, because it's being a warrant.
The town puts it on the ballot. They're asking us for the approval. We say, hell no.
And it's 2/3 or 50%.
It's 50%.
For MBTA zoning, it's 50% simple majority, unless you get signatures to bump up the threshold.
How do we do
How do
that?
we do that?
You don't have to do it.
It is clear that it applies to towns, town meetings, folks who probably assume that it does, I tend to agree with you. But the way you would do that if you wanted to, is that you need to know where the district is going to be. Then you need to get signatures from the landowners representing 50% of the land in the district, or 50% of the land within 100 yards of the district. Yeah, 300 feet, 100 yards. And then if you get that requisite number of signatures, not even of voters, because you can have a business sign, if you get the signatures of the landowners, you can theoretically bump the threshold back out to 2/3.
Years ago, I wasn't a Massachusetts resident and I was summering in Nantucket. And Popo showed up one night and I didn't know how many people were living in my house. And I saw briefs on because they were creating rooms everywhere. And we were told there's a law in Massachusetts that 6 unrelated people, no more than 6 unrelated people live in the same house or dwelling. So did that go away at some point? Because that was in.
I don't think that to be a state law. I think that to be a recommended zoning.
That's a Massachusetts law. Anyway, it's a long story, but we were told that that's not a law.
If it is, it has been struck as a constitution in the last 10 years. I don't recognize the rule that you're talking about. I see such rules in zoning codes as recommended by the state. The individual towns will adopt such a rule, but I've never seen that as a state law.
And the next thing, is there anything preventing us from distributing flyers?
Sorry, guys, I want to interrupt, but I do want to interrupt just for 1 second, because I see people are starting really to leave, and I want to first thank the presenters. They did a terrific job. To do this, they're not paid, so really, I want to thank you for my heart for being here and doing this and explaining such difficult complex like thoughts of like law that, are really hard for us to understand or heads around. I also want to say an important thing, the silver lining is we can do something about it. The situation is not easy, it's ugly, we can do something about it. That's what no, there are signs out there. For everybody to use, just know there are signs out there. If you have a good location of your house that's visible, if you know somebody that has it, consider getting some signs. $35 per sign, I believe, is the suggested donation, just so to get these things going. They have some costs, so please consider getting one or spreading the word for it, and contact us if you want some more. And if you have other questions for the attorneys down the road, contact us and we'll figure out a way to get the answers to you maybe.
There was one question about developers, were developers involved in the law, in the creation of the law? And the answer appears to be that they didn't have much in the way of impacting the economic development bill. A lot of it was focused on future government spending, but it appears that they had a ton of input into the state's adoption of the guidelines. And as part of that, one of the initial, this bill was part of this provision was sold to the legislature in affordable housing. That you look in the guidelines, all of a sudden affordable housing is discouraged, is certainly if you have too much of it. I've previously categorized this as developer's breakfast, so don't look at me for a neutral answer. But yes, we know that several developer organizations submitted input into the state when they were developing the guidelines after the law passed.
Thank you. The 40 pages.
Yes.
Now, do they know that who these developers are that carry that kind of weight in the state bureaucracy, so that you can say to yourself, these are the guys that are pushing this thing, and they're the state of the taxis for it, and that we're getting the you know what I'm saying?
Particularly they are, I'm afraid I don't know, but what we do know is that right before Governor Baker signed this law, the Mass Municipal Association, which is the trade lobby organization for municipal officials, and I have a lot of disagreements with the MMA, but they submitted a letter to Governor Baker and said, please do not sign this law into this provision into law because it will destroy local choice of zoning. And I think that's very telling.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Better late than never. Yeah.